Welcome to the Words That Change Lives podcast, helping leaders, coaches, and small business owners to 10 times the impact of their message. Join us as we delve into the art of powerful language, enabling you to speak with unwavering honesty, communicate authentically, and create a lasting impression with every word. So here's a common thing that I come across when I am talking to people who are coaches, consultants, small business owners, and also some leaders within larger organisations when it comes to actually communicating their expertise. Often what happens is they have this wealth of knowledge born from years of gathering wisdom, learning qualifications, mistakes, progress, failure, all of those sorts of things. And they are now at a place where they are offering services as a business, a small business, a coach or consultant, either to the consumer world or within the corporate world. And they find it really, really difficult to articulate all that gold in a way that is, 1, intriguing, 2, marketable, and 3, most importantly, clear and succinct. And over the years, I have helped many coaches to address this issue. I help them to look at their skills and their experience in a way that draws out the gold and puts it into a method, a framework, or a structure that can then be easily communicated to whoever you want to communicate it to, and visually communicated as well. And this is called what I call the expert method process. It's a way of succinctly articulating everything that makes you unique in the way that you help people, or the way that you lead, or the way that you run a business, or the way that you run a brand, so that people remember you uniquely for your unique set of skills and experience. And I say uniquely quite a few times then, but it is that uniqueness that's going to help you stand apart. It's your personality, your way of doing things, your story, and the way that your story has evolved along the way as well, that has all culminated in you being right there where you are right now, listening to this podcast and being able to articulate what it is you do. That then turns into a visual representation, which can go on your website, can go into a lead magnet, can go on collateral of any kind that you can share at networking events, in presentations, in talks. You can structure a keynote talk around your expert method, which I'll be sharing in other episodes. It's a really versatile and I would say crucial foundational thing that is required for you to be able to stand out in a crowded market, clearly articulating what you do. And this is really good for when you're having those conversations. Maybe you're having a call with a potential client and you are identifying the problems that they are having and the challenges they're currently facing. And then you're able to articulate how you can solve those problems by using this expert method process. And it can be a process. It could be a step-by-step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 point plan that they need to follow in incremental steps in that particular order in order to achieve the transformation that you can provide them through whatever service it is that you're offering. Or it may be a number of different ways that you could go, different routes you could take to achieve the outcome for that particular client. You can put this expert method together in a way that is understandable through shapes, squares, stars, crosses. It could be through elements of nature, trees, mountains. One of my first expert methods was my clarity mountain, which you might be able to find somewhere on the internet, or you can email me hello@helenpackham.com and I'll send you it. It looks pretty awful now, it's pretty dated, but that was my first expert method, and I used a mountain with like a base camp and then the peak, and there was different steps to go through to get there in terms of business clarity. So I called it the Clarity Mountain, and I've had many since then. I've currently got my AIR assessment, which is my current expert method, which looks at 3 key components: authority, impact, and reach. And the expert method is the fundamental foundation in the authority area. I've created an assessment so that you can take that, and I'll include that in the show notes of this particular episode. It's free to take, and it helps you to measure where you are in those areas if you are a coach, consultant, business owner, or a leader, and you're looking for ways to raise your credibility, to reach more people, and to increase the impact of your words. So that's my current expert method, and you can have more than one. I've worked with many clients on many different things, and by doing this in many different ways and with so many different clients, I've seen that this particular way of doing things can work no matter what your business is and no matter what niche or expertise you have. What you do need to have is some kind of way of going from A to B with the client. So it would be a service-based business of some kind. So your client or your audience or your customer is experiencing some type of challenge or problem before they buy your product or work with you or buy your program or course or whatever it might be. And then you have a way of bringing them from what I call the underworld, which is the problem phase, through to their utopia, which is that transformation phase after they have finished working with you. And essentially, you draw all of that expertise and experience together, you put it into themes, and you look at it in terms of, okay, what are the key components here? What are the key buckets that I'm looking at? And I do go into this in more detail and various other things I share across the internet. Please contact me if you'd like more information as well. And then you can start to clump those things together and create your own type of method. And what you'll probably see now is you'll look all over the internet and see that there's lots of people doing this, but hopefully you'll know those people for those things. Daniel Priestley is a really great example of this. I really admire all his work, and his key person of influence model is something that I've always been inspired by. He's got 5 key areas, and all of the work around the courses, programs, books that he has published around this particular topic is focused on those things. But I also want to share with you a real life example of this. And that's why in this episode, I have spoken to one of my clients. My client is Jo Twiselton, and she is an experienced human change specialist who has worked with a multitude of well-known brands and the leaders in them to support positive organisational cultures through times of uncertainty. And she believes that it's only by putting people first rather than systems or processes that successful and sustainable change can really happen. And she draws on her communication, coaching and facilitation expertise to help leaders and managers better prepare themselves and their teams for change. And that includes improving communication as well as encouraging collaboration and connection between people to help solve problems and achieve longer term transformations. And you can find out more about Jo in the show notes and more of what she's going to be sharing in our discussion. But ultimately, what we do in this chat is we walk through how she created her own expert method, which is the 4 fundamentals of human change, which completely encapsulates her expertise in a way that is completely on brand with her personality, her experience, her story, and how she shows up now and helps people within organizations to do the same thing. So it's a really great listen. It's a practical example of how you can do this yourself. And I hope that this episode gets your thoughts whirring. If this is something that is relevant to you, and I hope it is, please do keep listening, because you will hear in this conversation how Jo has done it, and so therefore how you can do it too. And if you would like support in creating your own expert method, I offer this as a one-to-one service that you can get in touch with me, hello@helenpackham.com, and we can have a chat about what your needs are. And if you like this episode, please do comment online, please do follow, subscribe and review, and so I can get the word out to as many people as possible that it is okay to communicate your expertise in a really clear way, and it is possible for you, and it really does increase the impact of your words. Enjoy. So, Jo, When you think about your expertise, which is what this episode is all about, and you think about how your expertise evolved, what does that look like?
So it started with, and this has been a continual thread throughout my life as well as my career, with words. So an avid reader from a very young age, which has not stopped all the way through life, really. I get through a heck of a lot of books, but I'm really fascinated by how we communicate, how we write, how we speak, and how our brains work to be able to kind of have the conversations that we need to have. And what I found over my career through PR and getting into organisational change is that all of those things kind of melded together. And it got into a kind of sweet spot almost probably about 5 or 6 years ago, where I saw it all coming together and how I could really help people with all the experience that I'd gotten to pull it all into one thing. But the foundations are communication between human beings.
So if we look at that in a bit more detail, what would you say the main sort of threads in terms of your career history, in terms of your experience that have enabled you to do what you do now?
I think it's a bit of making what felt like weird choices at one time and getting into it. So within a 6-week period, I decided to move to Finland, rented my house out, sold my car and went.
Wow.
Took a punt, arrived in Helsinki in November, which is never the time to go because it's really dark. And then we had loads of snow. So, yeah, that was a bit of a learning, but that enabled me to live in another culture and see what the impact of that was on us as humans and how to communicate in that perspective. And also how to deal with my own change journey. I don't like the journey word, but it was a change journey. What was that transition like? And then how did I deal with it? What did I learn from it? So there's been quite a few things like that. And then making decisions about setting up on my own, in my own business about 20 years ago. So there's been pivotal points of transition. And they're the things that I've learned that I've then taken into my work and how I coach other people and how I work with them as well.
That's really interesting because, and it's great to hear, it's quite refreshing to hear actually, because it's not a traditional career path.
No.
And I think it is quite comforting, reassuring for people. Say maybe people who are listening to this and thinking, well, I want to do my own thing. And so when we think about, your career, which we'll go into in a bit more detail in a minute in terms of exactly what you do now, but you didn't climb a career ladder in change.
Nope.
In sort of change to do with people or systems or processes. Your change experience has come from a combination of life transitions.
Yep.
And work experience.
Yep. Absolutely that, Helen.
Yeah. And I want to touch on, because you've got some PR background as well, haven't you? How has that influenced the work you do today?
PR was really helpful in helping to understand how to create messages and get your message across in a way that works for everybody, and understanding stakeholder groups, which is pivotal to a lot of the work that I still do in organisational change. So that was really important. And also one of the things that I learned from working particularly with leaders when we were working in those sorts of media situations is how we have to manage our emotions. So how do you get that message across without looking too emotional, even though you might be feeling it? So that how are you having an impact and how are you showing up? So that I think everything we do, we could be learning from everything, but they're the things that I really took away from that experience.
Yeah. And I think because I've never worked in PR myself, my communication experience has come from different angles and different places. But actually there's some real, this real skill in thinking about how you're presenting yourself. And I guess public relations is all about how you're presenting yourself, how you as a person or you as a brand are presenting yourself. So understanding that in terms of how to communicate effectively, especially when you are dealing with human beings,
Yep.
is really, really important. Is that what you did in Helsinki then?
So when I went to Helsinki, I started off as a marketing communications exec. So I was supporting sales teams basically in getting material together about products so that they could use it. And we're talking about really high tech stuff. And then I went on to work in the PR team. So I used to write all of the English written press releases
Uh-huh.
in the telecom section. So not mobile phones, but telecom. So the underground stuff. And that meant that I also got to coach some executive team leaders on speaking English. So helping them to do like stock exchange presentations. So when they're doing the year-end results, because Finnish is a very different language. When you listen to it, your mouth is formed in a different way when you speak Finnish. It's much more closed than the way that we speak with ours in English. So and the emphasis on words is quite different as well. We've got a very sing-songy language in English. And when you listen to other languages, you recognise that it's not quite the same. So helping people to learn how to sing-song a bit more was really interesting.
That is a fantastic well of experience to add to the pot. So let's look at that then, because, as we're sort of moving more towards the present day, and we'll find out more about what you do in a minute, as I said, you've got this communication experience of helping people within different cultures and different languages, how to communicate effectively, how to do that without emotion. And then you've got these change transitions yourself, these big transitions, those learnings, and we all learn from those transitions in our life, right? They can be really tough
Yeah.
at the time, but that change is tough. Change can be tough, right?
Yep.
And change is also inevitable, isn't it?
Yep.
Throughout our whole lives and our careers. What else in terms of a work perspective lent itself to the contribution of your expertise in terms of change?
That's a really good question, Helen. So there was the moving countries and then moving back.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't talk a lot about the moving back in those days because everybody had moved on. They launched a national lottery while I was abroad.
Oh, right.
So I didn't know how to play the lottery when I came back. So that was weird. When you go in and buy a ticket and the guy's like, this has been running for a year, how do you not know how to do it? All of those things. So there was the moving countries, there's the working with different teams. That's been an absolute wealth of experience. So different teams in different sectors at different levels of different expertise. So just taking all that knowledge really and just being in those situations and having to think on your feet as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think this is the reason why I ask these questions, is because when we think about our expertise, sometimes it's quite hard to sort of put our finger on or articulate really clearly, well, this is what I do.
Yeah.
And this is how I help people. And I know that we've done work together
Yeah.
on this. And before that, because you've been running your business for many years, how were you identifying that expertise and communicating that expertise?
So if I'm honest, I found it really hard because when you have your area of expertise, you know it inside out. And one of the things that I have to be really wary of is that I say to leaders, you need to bring people with you and you need to remember that they're not at the same position as you are and they don't have the same level of knowledge. And lo and behold, I'm going in having to do the same thing with myself of going, I know this, they don't. So I need to judge where people are on that, what position they're in. So a lot of the conversations that I have, and you probably relate to this, is, and I think it was your chocolate strategy actually that really made me think about it, is what door am I going into and who's the person on the other side of that door, and what do they need to know, so that I can have another conversation, a different conversation about everything that we could talk about. The challenge that I had before we started working together is I was going, right, so you've got organisational change, you can do wellbeing and resilience as part of that. That's really important, blah, blah. And it was like overwhelm. And I was having a conversation of questions and answers about what people needed, but it's very difficult to explain all that really clearly and succinctly.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's so much, right?
Yep, absolutely.
There's so much. There's a huge, vault of knowledge. There's a huge vault of different approaches, different techniques, different strategies that are completely dependent on the specific person, situation, problem, organization, culture that you are dealing with. And I've been the same here, in terms of my own expertise. Before I was able to create my own methods for this, and thinking, well, I just gotta give them everything because that's what they need, right? Surely that's what they need. I'm just going to tell them everything. Well, as we know, and I'm talking here mainly to people who are consultants, coaches, people who run their own businesses, who maybe work with organizations or companies, that if you do that, you're not likely to be hitting the mark, because you've really got to hone in on what an organization, a decision maker, whoever that is in that company needs, what problem they have, and what transformation is required.
Yep.
And in order to do that, you need to have a way of organizing your expertise in a way that makes sense to you and therefore to other people, so that you can communicate that effectively. So let's look at that then, because we worked on that together.
Yep.
And as we were going through that, what was that process like for you? And we're going to share your expert method in a short while, but what was the process of bringing that together like for you, in terms of the ease of being able to put it in some kind of structure or order, so that then you could communicate it succinctly?
So when you ask that question, there's quite a few things that spring to mind. So one, it was good fun. So it was a really engaging conversation. And I think that's a really big part of it, because again, we can get into the weeds of what we do. The second part is asking the right questions. We can't tend to do that on our own. We can, but again, we go down the rabbit hole of, well, they might want to know this, or I need to talk about this because I like it, so I want to talk more about it.
Yeah.
But actually, as you said, it's what's it about for the client? What's important to them? What problem are they solving? What transformation do they want? So there was fun, there was asking the right questions, but there's also the chunking it up piece. So how do you chunk it up so that it's relevant to whoever that you can make it relevant to whoever you're talking to or having a conversation with? And it meant that everything was aligned. So I had quite a few penny dropping moments where I could see where things aligned, and it was easier to tell the story of how things fitted together.
I think there's a really good point in terms of chunking it up, because when we think about all of our expertise, in a long scroll, rolling out behind us, and we could be like, well, I've got this, I've got all this, I did this, I've done this work, I know about this. We need to remove ourselves from the weeds.
Yes.
In order to look at it more strategically, in order to communicate it clearly to other people. And so that process of creating themes around those different buckets, whatever you want to call it, buckets, themes, groups of topics, of areas of expertise together, in understanding that in a journey that you might take your client through, a potential pathway that you might take them through. And some people do have that and some people don't. Some people, it's like, well, we start at A and then we have to go to B, C, D, E, F, G in order to get the result. Sometimes that's the process. Other times it's, well, depending on the clients need, the organizations need, we might jump straight to C.
Yeah.
Or we might have to go a different route to get to the end. So it depends on what your service is, what your service offering. And when we were coming up with that, and when you were creating that, and that was emerging, remind me, what was that conclusion in terms of it wasn't necessarily a step by step?
No, and this is fundamental to any coach or consultant that's listening. They will know this, that you need to have the conversation to understand what the challenge is. So it's identifying that, exactly what you just said. It's identifying what position someone's at, what part of the journey are they at, to then decide, to help them decide where they need to focus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a guide for them and to help them get a clearer picture in their mind of the problem that they need solving, because sometimes people within organizations, they don't have a clear picture of that.
No.
And I don't know about your experience, but often we need this training for our people. That's what we need.
Yeah.
So can you give that to us, rather than this is the problem.
Yeah.
This is the impact of the problem. And this is what we need to look at in terms of how we're actually going to solve it and the outcome that we want.
Yeah.
And creating an expert method can enable that. Now, for anybody listening, you would have heard Jo mention about the chocolate room strategy. Now, you may not have come across that in the work that I've done, and I'm going to be dedicating a podcast episode purely to the chocolate room strategy. But just so you know what that is, if you are a coach and consultant, it's a way of sharing with people a door opener. So imagine the corridor in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory that Willy Wonka walks down. There's a tiny door at the end. And then you open the door into the chocolate room, which has all of your treats, all of your wisdom, all of your knowledge. It's how you're opening the door to that. So that could be with an expert method. That could be with a keynote talk. But it's a way of introducing your client, the organization that you're working with, to your ideas, to your services, in a way that you can then unpack and unfurl and share all of those tasty treats further down the line. Because we can't bombard our potential clients with all of the chocolates and the river full of chocolate, all of that, when they haven't really locked into what the issue is and really understand that for themselves. So let's talk about your expert method, Jo, because I absolutely love it. And, in terms of, we'll talk about the visuals in a minute, but could you just share with us what you came up with as your expert method as a result of this process?
So through the process working with you, we got to the 4 fundamentals of human change. And that is the core message that everything emanates from, really. So there are 4 elements. The clue is in the title. And they all sit around it. And none of these are in any order of priority. It's purely dependent on what the client needs out of those areas. So the 4 areas are, again, in no order of priority: well-being and resilience, connection, people readiness, and behaviour. And beneath each of those, we've identified 3 different elements that sit within those. So at any given point in an individual's change journey or an organisational change project or programme or whatever's happening, there may be elements that people draw on, leaders draw on, L&D teams draw on, out of those 4 things that they recognise are going to be helpful in addressing the challenge or the issue that they've identified.
And the crux of this particular expert method is the word human.
Yes, it is.
Because, I've got quite a lot of experience of working within organisations with change teams and change projects and big ones, transitions and acquisitions and restructures and tech systems and all of those sorts of things. And in my experience, the metrics and the systems and the milestones and the tension points and all of those sorts of things are prioritised. but the people aren't.
No.
And so let's dive into one of these fundamentals a little bit more so we can understand it. Let's look at people readiness, because I think that's a really important one, right?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So when we were working through this, it became really apparent that a lot of the work that I do, when I'm brought in to speak to leaders or teams, I'm brought in at a point that I feel is quite late. So what we're looking at is starting before you start. So if you imagine that we're at the Olympics and I'm coming in when the gun's gone off, rather than I'm limbering up at the start line, or even I'm doing the training 6 months before.
Yeah.
So that element of starting before you start is quite often organisations will be working with change teams and project teams, and they'll have quite a lot of that kind of on a plan or a project plan. They'll be doing impact assessments, all that sort of thing. So what's the impact of this change on the people in the organisation? All good. But it's the elements that come with that. So is your leader, for example, they're looking at the start line, they've got their shoes on, but have they done the training and are they equipped to be at the start line?
Mm-hmm.
So how are they feeling about this? Because they've possibly got to give news to their peers or people that they've worked with for a really long time that they've now got to get into that situation. And you can say that's part of the job and you need to put your big pants on and get on with it. But actually, again, it comes to that human element. So how can you support people to do that better? But you're starting before you start.
Yeah.
So there's recovery points. So you've started off or you're coming up to the start line. We can get into a constant, at the moment, with the amount of change that's happening inside organisations, it's just running. And I question where we've got recovery points in that. So how are we helping our teams to take a breather? And you can't stop change as much as we'd like to, but how can you adapt to make it easier to deal with it? So thinking, again, starting before you start. Yeah. And then it's how you're learning lessons as you go through and making sure that you're capturing them and using those lessons as you go through and not parking them in a file somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's really important. It's that if we want our people to come along with us, we have to do some groundwork first.
Yeah. That's it.
And in my experience, change is kind of just thrust upon everybody.
Yeah.
And then that's an afterthought. The people readiness is like, well, it's happening now.
Yeah.
And, literally the organisations I'm working with at the moment and the huge changes they've been through.
Yeah.
It was all, it's happening, but we don't know when it's happening and don't know what's happening. And then, it's happened and now everybody has to kind of come on board.
Yeah.
But there's a psychology in that in terms of psychological safety and psychological contracts with an organisation and creating motivation, intent and buy-in and connection to a change where if we can start before we start, if we can get on the front foot and plan that into the process so that when that starting gun goes off, we've got a good chance that a hefty percentage of our people will be educated, will understand, hopefully be bought in and have intent, motivation and alignment with whatever that is. And of course, that's an ideal world. Of course, there's going to be situations where there's big change, which leads to consequences that people don't want. But if they're bought into it, if they're communicated to, they understand before these things happen, rather than keeping it a secret and then thrusting it, then you're going to be in a much better situation, right?
Yeah. And sometimes there's things that you can't share. But that should be the 80-20 rule rather than the 20-80.
Yeah. And that's why I loved working on this with you, because I could see the direct application of it and how it can benefit people. And when you were pulling this together, that was, a real key part of these 4 fundamentals, but they're all really, really important. So you pulled this together, you've got these 4 fundamentals, and under each of those sections, you had little sections that you created more detail around. What I would love to explore with you and share with you is the assets that you have now created to enable the communication of this and the conversations that you can have around this.
So as we were doing the work together, I'm quite visual in the way that I like to get information. So I took what we were doing and took it to someone who's a graphic designer, Anne-Marie Miller, and she turned it into a very straightforward graphic, very straightforward. And that is the tool that I use the most to talk about what I do. Because when people can see it and I can navigate them through it, or they can navigate themselves through it, actually, which is always interesting to see, then it becomes much easier to have a conversation around it. It's a conversation starter.
Yeah. It's that door opener, right?
Absolutely right.
To the chocolate room.
Yeah.
And I've seen this, and I'm sure we can provide a way that, you know, people can see this themselves in the show notes. But it's a real striking, visually compelling infographic where it's in your brand colours.
Yep.
And it's got some lovely visual symbols, and there's a real, you know, it's easy to understand, but you can see that it can unpack to so much more.
Yes.
That can then form part of the conversation.
That's it.
And I also know, so that you've created this infographic, which has got on the first page is a high level visual of what this is. And on the second page goes into more detail.
Yes, that's right.
As well as ways that people can contact you and get in touch with you and all of that sort of thing. And you've also created something else, I believe, because you went to a networking event recently.
Yeah. So I put the infographic, the 4 elements, fundamental, onto my website and created a QR code so that people can access that. And again, used it as a conversation tool at networking. So when people ask you what you do at a networking event, I tested it and I was like, this is what I do. So it was quite interesting as a test to see how it was received, really.
Yeah. And I think that's genius because networking events, there's so much power. You know, if you're a consultant, you're a coach, you're looking to win business within small businesses, medium-sized businesses, large businesses, going to a networking event and having that in your toolbox to share at the drop of a hat, to have someone to scan, and then you have a conversation around that is absolutely wonderful. And not only that, you can use this when you are approaching organizations on LinkedIn, where you may be contacting them. They're asking for more information. You send them the QR code.
Yeah.
Or you can just send the infographic and then hinge the conversation around that so that you can explore that in terms of their specific issues, their specific challenges more fully. And then when you go to put your proposal together, you're basing your offering on the things from your expert method, but it's completely in line with the need of that organization and the problems they're facing.
Yeah.
So it's an asset, right? It's an asset for further conversation and communication, right?
Yep.
So how would you say, just to summarize then, how would you say creating this expert method has helped you succinctly communicate your expertise?
So it's really helped in probably 3 ways. So the first way is it stopped me getting into a really detailed conversation without knowing where the other person is and having that whole glazed over look of you being really passionate about something and someone else not being quite as passionate as you. So that's been a real positive. The second thing is it's helped to build my confidence, weirdly, because it's kept me focused on things that I love doing, things that I know are going to be of value to clients and prospective clients. And also being able to talk confidently about those areas of what I can do. And the third thing is just doing what I say that I do. And I talk about being clear, focused, and succinct in how I communicate and have impact. So this now reflects what I say that I tell my clients they should be doing. So yeah, it's those 3 ways. I think it's made a big difference.
Yeah. And I agree, for myself too. So, a way of ordering the thoughts. I think this goes with any type of communication. If we can order our thoughts internally, then we can communicate more succinctly externally.
Yes.
And that goes with any type of communication, public speaking, presentations, briefings, meetings, whatever it might be. Having that type of internal order can really help when you're delivering it.
Yeah. That's a really good point, Helen, because that process of working with you gave me that space to do it, because we don't make the space to do it otherwise.
We don't. And we need that space for the creativity, for the dots to join and all of that sort of thing. Well, I really appreciate you sharing this, and it's lovely to go over it again and explore this with you, and hopefully this has inspired other people that there is a way that you can do this. You can share your expertise in a way that's clear and to the point, but that helps people to open the door to unpack things further if needed. And with all my guests that come on Words That Change Lives, I ask one final question, which is, what words have changed your life, Jo?
So there is a quote by a French author called Anais Nin, and it is that life shrinks or expands in proportion to one's courage. Now, I heard this years ago and then got reminded of it by a coach called Caroline Pankhurst, and she works around bravery. And it reminded me why it was so important for me.
And I think when I think about that in my own story, gosh, it's just so true. Because when I felt like I didn't have any courage, I hid from the world, ran away from things, avoided, stuck my head in the sand. And life shrunk as a result of that.
Yeah.
But when I created courage as my highest value and was led by courage and made decisions based on courage, my life massively expanded. Did you say that's the same experience for you?
Yeah, because for me, courage prompts curiosity, and then it switches from being stuck inside your own head to being curious about what's going on everywhere. So yes, I totally agree with you.
Well, I think that's a wonderful point to close on today. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast, Jo. And please look at the show notes for all the ways that you can get in touch with Jo. You can find out more about her expert method and how she works with organisations.
Thank you, Helen.
Thanks for listening to Words That Change Lives. Please rate, review and follow on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts. It really means the world and helps me to reach more people so that we can all harness the power of our words and change lives for the better.